Flights all around the world have begun to record that which is impossible to explain. Strange passengers, disturbing incidents in the cabin, and objects outside the windows that should not be there. And the more such cases appear, the more difficult it is to consider this a coincidence. Let us figure out what is actually happening in the sky. But before the beginning, I will ask you to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This will help me a lot in the promotion of the videos. Enjoy the view. High above LaGuardia, when the airplane was already preparing for landing, one of the passengers noticed how something strange rushed through the sky at an incredible speed. At first, it looked simply like a blurred spot, like a short flash that could be attributed to a trick of the light or eye fatigue. But later, when the recording was slowed down, something much more disturbing became visible. The object had a clear shape, reminding one of a classic flying saucer. This is exactly what caused special interest. The recording attracted the attention of not only viewers on the internet, but also the pilot, as well as the dispatchers. The most disturbing thing turned out to be that the object was never recorded by radars. It appeared suddenly, crossed the airspace, and disappeared just as quickly, as if it did not obey at all those laws by which everything else exists in the sky. And if this really was not an error of perception, then the question remains: what exactly crossed the trajectory of the passenger flight right before landing? Sometimes a flight changes in 1 second, and exactly this happened on a flight from Chicago to New Jersey 5 years ago, in May, when the silence of the cabin was suddenly torn by a loud crack. Approximately half an hour after departure from Midway Airport, the camera of one of the passengers recorded the moment when one of the windows received damage, and following this, a powerful pop rolled through the cabin. Despite the fact that the panic did not get out of control, the tension was felt in every row. The pilots acted quickly and without unnecessary movements, making the decision to urgently change the route and direct the airplane to Cleveland. When the aircraft finally landed safely, a wave of relief rolled through the cabin. No one was injured, but the moment itself, when an ordinary flight in a matter of seconds turns into a scene from a disaster movie, forever remained in the memory of those who were in the air at that time. Passengers flying over Tampa in Florida were enjoying a calm flight when suddenly something appeared outside the window that instantly made everyone forget about the usual routine of the flight. A disc-shaped object, softly glowing with a green light, entered the field of view. It stayed in the zone of visibility long enough so that its shape and color could be examined without doubts, and then just as unexpectedly accelerated and left with such a speed that no one on board had ever seen before. It became quiet in the cabin almost immediately. People were simply trying to comprehend what exactly had happened before their eyes. Even after landing, this episode did not let the eyewitnesses go, turning into one of those stories that is impossible to simply forget or brush off like an ordinary optical error. In September of the year 2015, a passenger of a Ryanair flight from Eindhoven to Spain turned out to be a witness to an extremely disturbing moment during a flight over the Netherlands. A dark, disc-shaped object rapidly headed toward the wing of the airplane, and its approach caused noticeable air disturbances. The situation turned out to be so serious that the captain had to react quickly in order to stabilize the airplane. Later, the recording made by the passenger spread across the internet and attracted the attention not only of viewers, but also of the mass media. Many describe this episode as one of the most frightening examples of a close encounter with an unknown object in the air. And exactly such moments make the usual explanation increasingly difficult, as if people simply confuse what they saw or become victims of optical illusions. When an object comes so close and the airplane truly feels the consequences, to doubt becomes much more difficult. Rare footage, filmed on the 27th of October over Russia, recorded a bright object that rapidly rushed across the sky and left behind a glowing trail. The recording was made by a flight attendant of a flight from Ulyanovsk to Moscow, who noticed this phenomenon at a high altitude. From approximately 10,000 meters above the ground, everything looked surprisingly close, and at the same time, truly powerful. The object literally illuminated the sky on its path, and its shape remained not fully understood, which only intensified the feeling of scale and mystery. After publication, the video quickly spread across the network, because such phenomena are rarely successfully filmed from an airplane so clearly and from such an angle. And exactly in this was the special power of these frames, in the feeling that the observation occurred not somewhere far away on the ground, but almost right next to the people who were in the air. On the 6th of September of the year 2021, on an American Airlines flight from Los Angeles to Salt Lake City, an anxiety began to spread in the cabin, for which at first there was no obvious reason. An elderly man suddenly began to behave defiantly and aggressively, without any understandable cause. He stood up from his seat over and over again, entered into tense contacts with those around him, and as if intentionally provoked an increase in tension in the cabin. Every time he stood up, the atmosphere became heavier. The crew, including the captain, acted calmly and professionally, trying to keep the situation under control and not allow panic. At some point, the man nevertheless sat down, but continued to behave strangely, already manipulating his mask and causing ever greater anxiety among those around him. After landing, police officers had to intervene in the matter. And although outwardly everything ended without a disaster, for those who were nearby, this flight had already ceased to be an ordinary trip. During one of the flights, a passenger noticed something that caused him an almost physical feeling of anxiety. Not far away sat a figure in a hood, which continuously looked in his direction. The most unpleasant thing in this situation was not simply the gaze itself, but the face. It seemed somehow wrong, as if the person was trying with all his might to remain unnoticed. But at the same time, his very appearance already throws one off balance. The passenger fully realized what was happening only at that moment when the food trolley began to pass through the cabin. Exactly then, he decided to take a photograph. Later, this photograph spread across the internet and caused a stormy reaction. Many wrote that the figure in the photo looks frightening and as if not entirely human. And although there is no objective explanation for this, the very atmosphere of the frame continues to cause genuine discomfort in people. On the 13th of May of the year 2022, an Air India flight heading to Newark departed from Delhi as a completely ordinary international flight. Everything went calmly for approximately the first half hour, until something occurred inside the cabin for which no one was ready. A bat was noticed in the airplane. For the passengers and the crew, this became a complete surprise. The incomprehensible animal, suddenly appearing inside an enclosed space at a high altitude, quickly caused alarm. The captain did not take risks and made the decision to return the airplane back to the airport of departure. Of course, this caused irritation and delays, but the story almost immediately hit the network and turned into one of the strangest and most discussed episodes, when an ordinary commercial flight suddenly became a place for a completely inappropriate and disturbing appearance of an uninvited guest. In February, the internet literally exploded after one of the female passengers stated that she saw something completely inexplicable outside the window of the airplane. The object was moving next to the aircraft at a high speed and looked more like an element of a science fiction movie than like something that could be expected to be seen in an ordinary sky. The woman did not immediately understand what exactly was nearby. Therefore, she simply started recording, deciding later to give the viewers the opportunity to draw conclusions themselves. The author of the video was Zoe Montoya, a graduate student flying on a Southwest Airlines flight from Nevada to Oklahoma. She uploaded the recording to TikTok, and already in a few days, the video gathered millions of views. A short episode, which occurred in the air in just a few seconds, turned into one of the most discussed mysteries of social networks, where some saw in it an ordinary illusion and others, something that should not have been next to a passenger airplane. A few minutes before the departure of a British flight, a heavy and unpleasant tension began to build up in the cabin. One of the passengers refused to sit in his seat, despite the repeated requests of the crew. The flight attendants demanded over and over again that he take his seat, but the man continued to either stand up or lower himself or rise again, as if intentionally disrupting the order and testing the patience of those around him. The passengers at first did not intervene, hoping that the situation would not go beyond an ordinary conflict. But with every minute, it became clear that everything was only getting worse. The delay dragged on. The atmosphere in the cabin became increasingly heavy, and the behavior of the man remained just as strange and inexplicable. As a result, police officers boarded, tried to calmly talk to him and lead him out without unnecessary noise. However, he refused to cooperate, and then he had to be removed by force. Only after this, the situation finally concluded, leaving behind among the passengers a feeling of disturbing absurdity. 2 years before one of the most discussed cases in February, an Airbus A320 airplane was flying over Medellin in Colombia, when the pilot noticed an object outside the window of the cockpit that clearly did not fit into the usual picture of the sky. A metallic-looking body was moving past the airplane evenly and calmly along a straight trajectory, without visible signs of instability. As it approached, the object became clearer, and its shape looked particularly strange. A dark cube, the dimensions of which were estimated at approximately 10 to 15 feet. It had no noticeable wings, it had no engines, it had nothing that could explain the method of movement. Later, some specialists expressed the opinion that such a shape and character of flight might indicate extremely advanced technology, possibly even unmanned devices sent by intelligent observers to study the Earth. And although this sounds like a scenario of a science fiction thriller, the recording itself continues to raise questions to which there is still no convincing answer. Many on the internet at first tried to present this as just another nervous scene on board. But for those who were inside the airplane, everything looked much more serious. On the 3rd of April of the year 2024, on a Spirit Airlines flight, a real panic began after one of the female passengers suddenly started to scream loudly and did not stop for a single second. With every minute, her behavior became more and more tense and strange, and those around her felt more and more clearly that the situation was getting out of control. The woman shouted words about freedom, refused to obey instructions, and did not react to the attempts of the crew to calm her down. As a result, an extremely rare decision was made: to completely evacuate the entire airplane in order to remove her without a threat to other people. The video, lightning fast, spread across the network, and it was exactly the scale of the reaction that showed how serious this moment turned out to be for those who were on board. This incident occurred on the 28th of November of the year 2024 on a flight from Austin to Los Angeles, when the airplane was still in the air, and one of the passengers suddenly began to behave more and more aggressively and unpredictably. In the later frames, it is visible how the person stands right on the seat and forcefully hits it over and over again, while the rest of the passengers remain almost motionless, as if they do not understand how to react correctly in such a situation. After landing, the authorities intervened, and later it was stated that, at the moment of the incident, this person was clearly not in a normal state. The Federal Aviation Administration began an official investigation, and the aviation company United Airlines soon confirmed that this passenger will never again be able to use their flights. The recording quickly scattered across the internet, adding to the long list of disturbing scenes occurring high above the ground, where people have almost no opportunity to simply walk away from danger. Anyone who has flown at least a few times knows how quickly tension can accumulate in a cramped cabin, especially when personal space is already reduced to a minimum. During one flight, right after the completion of the safety briefing, a conflict flared up between two young women because of a reclined seatback. Instead of calmly discussing the problem, the female passenger in the front began to provoke the one sitting behind, tossing her hair over the back of the seat right into her space. In response, that one did not hold back and began to rub chewing gum into the hair. But everything did not end even on this. Soon, the hair was also dipped into a glass with fruit juice. One of the passengers, sitting behind, started to record what was happening, documenting how an ordinary everyday quarrel rapidly transforms into a humiliating and unpleasant conflict right in the middle of the airplane cabin. However, the recording cuts off before it becomes clear how exactly everything ended, and this only intensifies the feeling of unresolved tension. Sometimes a flight unexpectedly turns into chaos, not because of people, but because something completely inappropriate appears in the cabin. On the 6th of October, a flight to Mexico City turned out to be delayed for several hours after a whole swarm of mosquitoes burst into the cabin. The passengers almost immediately understood that they were sharing the space not only with each other, because the insects were circling around the cabin, landing on people, and interfering with the crew performing their work. In the video, it is visible how the flight attendants wave their hands and spray repellent, trying to somehow take the situation under control. The flight, which was supposed to depart at 4:30 in the afternoon, departed only at 7, and all this time, the people were in an extremely uncomfortable, nervous, and almost absurd environment, where the usual routine of the airport suddenly turned into a real ordeal. One of the most unpleasant features of commercial flights is the passengers capable of turning an ordinary delay into an almost theatrical chaos. During one flight, a woman noticeably lost her temper after the time of arrival was postponed. Instead of simply waiting like everyone else, she approached the door of the pilot's cockpit and began to knock persistently, demanding a conversation directly with the crew. When other passengers started asking questions, she stated as if she works for the aviation company and perfectly understands what is happening. The problem was that she did not have any uniform on. There were no confirmations of her words, and her very behavior looked increasingly irritated and unconvincing. The more people began to record what was happening, the stronger her irritation grew. She argued, refused to retreat, and continued to behave as if she truly has the right to interfere in the actions of the crew. As a result, an ordinary delay turned into a nervous and unpleasant episode that left the passengers with more questions about her real motives than answers. On board an AirAsia Airbus A320 airplane, executing a flight from Kuala Lumpur to Tawau, Malaysia, an event occurred that in itself sounds like a nightmare for any passenger. Already during the flight, a snake was noticed inside the cabin. Under the light of the cabin, it was visible that it was located inside the airplane, and although it almost did not move, its presence alone turned out to be enough to cause serious alarm. The crew made the decision to change the route and make a forced landing for precautionary purposes. Later, various versions were put forward. Someone believed that the snake could have gotten out of the luggage. Others assumed that it somehow penetrated into the airplane even before departure. The video, published by pilot Hanafi Mood Yunus, quickly spread across the internet and forced thousands of people to feel that special discomfort which arises when you understand, even at an altitude of thousands of meters, you are still not protected from completely earthly horrors. On the 22nd of February of the year 2024, on an American Airlines flight from New Mexico to Chicago, an episode occurred that many passengers later called the scariest moment in their lives. Already during the flight, one of the men suddenly rushed to the emergency exit and, according to the words of eyewitnesses, tried to open the door right in the air. A passenger sitting nearby immediately engaged in a struggle with him, trying to drag him away and not let him finish what he started. The people around heard screams, panic began, and some later recounted that they felt a draft of air at that moment when he was pulling the door. Several passengers instantly intervened, and exactly their quick reaction did not allow the situation to become even more dangerous. The airplane was able to continue the flight and landed safely, but immediately after landing, the police boarded in order to detain the man. For many, this case became a frightening reminder of how thin the line is between an ordinary flight and a real nightmare. On the 31st of October of the year 2015, during boarding a Ryanair flight through London Stansted in the direction of Galway, one of the passengers encountered a coincidence that looked almost unreal. When he approached his seat, it turned out that a person was already sitting in it, who looked almost like his exact copy. Later, the man was identified as the photographer Neil Thomas Douglas from Glasgow. The resemblance turned out to be so striking that it momentarily attracted the attention of those around. The tension quickly changed to laughter. Both men took a joint photo, which later widely spread across the network. But the story did not end on this. It turned out that they were staying in the exact same hotel in Galway, and later again accidentally met in a local pub. Too many coincidences for one trip, and exactly for this reason, this case is still remembered as one of the strangest and almost mystical episodes that happened during an ordinary flight. In November of the year 2020, reports about a strange figure next to the Los Angeles International Airport caused a real alarm. Several pilots reported that they saw in the air something resembling a person with a jetpack, flying at a high altitude right next to ordinary air traffic. At first, assumptions appeared about a large balloon in the shape of a person, and some specialists indeed called this version the most probable. But the doubts did not disappear anywhere. The descriptions of the pilots sounded too confident, and the recordings of the negotiations only intensified the mystery of what was happening. For the first time, the object was not only described, but also caught on camera, which caused even greater public interest. An investigation began on the part of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The case was also studied by the Federal Aviation Administration. But even after time, no one was arrested, and an official final explanation never appeared. And exactly this continues to fuel interest, because if it was not a balloon, then what exactly was flying in the zone of one of the busiest airports in the world? On the 29th of October of the year 2018, a security employee finishing his shift at the Mexico City airport encountered a moment that will later be called one of the most disturbing incidents connected with an empty airplane. Having heard strange sounds coming from a parked aircraft, he decided to check the source. With a flashlight in his hand, he walked down the dark aisle and made sure that no one should be inside. But suddenly, a dark figure appeared from around the corner. This happened so sharply that the employee in shock rushed outside. Later, it was reported that the exact same presence was also noticed repeatedly during a further check. After this, the man remained in deep shock, and the story itself very quickly spread across the internet, where they began to discuss it as one of the strangest events ever connected with an empty airplane. And exactly such stories give birth to the feeling that not all disturbing things happen only in the sky. Sometimes they begin even before takeoff. On the 16th of April of the year 2020, one of the flights passing over the Sahara Desert became a place for a truly strange observation. One of the passengers noticed outside the window an object that was moving next to the airplane as if accompanying it. The shape did not resemble a drone, nor a classic saucer, nor anything familiar from aviation technology. On the contrary, the silhouette was rather similar to something elongated and strangely mobile, almost resembling a crane in flight. At the same time, no details were visible that could explain how this object is held in the air at such a speed. It appeared almost suddenly, stayed nearby for some time, and then disappeared without warning. The passengers were left stunned by how quickly everything began and ended, leaving behind nothing except a short recording and the feeling that something not subject to an ordinary explanation was moving next to the airplane. Just recently, one of the passengers noticed an object in the sky that immediately stood out from everything familiar. It was large, rotating, and moving with such unpredictability that it seemed as if it itself did not obey a stable trajectory. Its shape resembled a giant oblong tic-tac, and at the same time, no one could determine what exactly was caught in the frame. The shadow that this object cast looked especially strange, because it indicated that we are not talking about a simple visual illusion and not about a glare on the glass. This was something material. Someone assumed that it is an unusual flying apparatus that behaves unstably, and someone saw in it something much stranger. But regardless of the version, the recording itself left behind that rare mixture of confusion and curiosity, because of which similar videos are then discussed for a long time all over the internet. In September of the year 2025, residents of the area near the Gulf of Guatemala noticed a strange object in the night sky that was moving too smoothly and confidently so that it could be easily attributed to familiar aviation technology. Its shape was unusual, and the trajectory, even unstable, without shivering jerks and signs of instability. Soon reports appeared that an Apache helicopter was located nearby, and its pilots encountered short-term failures of visual observation systems, as if something interfered in the work of the onboard equipment. The object itself remained visible only for a short time, after which it dissolved in the darkness. When the recording hit the internet, the discussion flared up almost instantly. The people were especially hooked by the fact that the strange observation turned out to be connected not only with the object itself, but also with the activity of another aerial vehicle nearby. And such coincidences are already perceived completely differently than ordinary rumors about unidentified lights in the sky. During a flight over Poland, the author of the video noticed something massive, situated right above a dense layer of clouds. At first, it was almost unnoticeable because the color of the object merged with the general air mass. But the longer the person peered, the more obvious its shape became. This no longer looked like an ordinary airplane or a natural formation, rather like some huge structure hovering over the clouds and not manifesting apparent movement. The size of the object amazed, and its immobility only intensified the strange impression. The passengers, who later saw these frames, began to share them on the network in the hope of receiving answers. Some connected what was seen with experimental systems of a new generation. Others believed that this is something going beyond the limits of everyday experience of air travel. But regardless of the version, the very presence of such a gigantic silhouette above the clouds looked too unusual to pass by. During boarding on a United Airlines flight in the year 2025, one of the passengers began to record what at first seemed like an ordinary scene, with an irritated woman who made a scandal before departure. But the situation quickly began to look much more disturbing. The woman persistently claimed that someone who is not a normal person is located on board, and demanded to immediately let her out of the airplane. At first, this could have been taken for an emotional breakdown, but then everything became even stranger. Another passenger also panicked and stated that he noticed something unusual in the exact same person. The author of the video began to nervously look around the cabin, trying to again find the one who caused such a reaction, but never managed to clearly capture the supposed culprit of the fear. Exactly this is what left behind an especially unpleasant feeling. Not the scene of panic itself, but the fact that the source of anxiety seemed to be present and simultaneously slipped away from any clear confirmation. Late in the evening, a person was returning home when his attention was attracted by something strange in the sky. At first, it looked like an ordinary cloud, but the longer he peered, the stronger the feeling arose that the shape was too even and neat for a natural formation. The object seemed to hover in one place, not moving and not changing position, as if ignoring the wind and any natural streams of air. Having become interested, he stopped and began to record. After publication, the video quickly scattered across the network. Some claimed that this is just a rare cloud formation. Others were certain that something disguised as the usual picture of the sky was captured in the frame. But everyone was united by one thing: a strange feeling that this object looked too correct to be accidental. Near an open restaurant under the open sky, an ordinary evening suddenly turned into a scene that is difficult to forget. People were calmly having dinner when a huge dark disk appeared above them. It moved slowly and confidently, approaching the building, and the soft blue glow only intensified the feeling of the unreality of what was happening. With every second, the object was becoming closer and closer, and the tension among the eyewitnesses grew. But the recording suddenly cuts off at exactly that moment when the situation begins to seem the most disturbing. What happened next was never recorded. Later, rumors began to spread on the internet that some people who were in the restaurant allegedly disappeared. No official confirmation of this appeared, but the story itself left behind a feeling that something much more serious could have occurred outside the frame. All these stories are united by one thing. They occur in a place where a person is used to feeling in safety, completely relying on technologies and control. But exactly there, at an altitude of thousands of meters, events appear increasingly often that do not fit into the usual picture of the world. And the more such cases become known, the more difficult it is to perceive them as an accident or a mistake. Possibly a part of them indeed has a rational explanation, but some of them leave behind too many questions in order to simply forget about them. And the main one of them remains open. What exactly are we seeing in the sky in reality?